The door doesn't slam. It seals. No bars. No shouting guards. No second chances. Just concrete, steel, and silence. This is not a prison built to punish violence. It's built to erase influence. Inside these walls are inmates the system decided it could no longer control, people considered too dangerous to interact with other humans. No yard, no contact, no noise. For 23 hours a day, they sit alone in a space smaller than a parking spot, watched by cameras that never blink. Some last years, some break in months, and some never leave the same again. This is where the justice system draws its final line. And what happens here raises a question no one wants to answer. Backhand index pointing right. Can a prison designed to stop crime quietly destroy the mind? Why this prison exists, this prison was not built because crime increased. It was built because control failed. For decades, traditional prisons relied on one assumption, that inmates could be managed through routine, supervision, and separation by security level. Maximum security facilities were supposed to be the end of the line. But by the late 20th century, that system began to crack. Some inmates didn't just break rules. They ran the prison. From inside their cells, they ordered assaults, coordinated gang activity, threatened staff, and controlled other inmates through fear and reputation alone. Lockdowns didn't stop it. Transfers didn't stop it. Even isolation inside normal prisons wasn't enough, because influence doesn't need proximity. It needs communication. The government faced a problem it didn't want to publicly admit. There were people the prison system could no longer safely contain. These inmates were not necessarily the most violent on a daily basis. Many were intelligent, patient, and strategic. They understood prison politics better than the system itself. They exploited guards, manipulated routines, and used even the smallest privileges, a note, a look, a word, to maintain power. Every time one of these inmates was moved to another facility, the problem followed. Violence spiked. Staff were targeted. Entire wings had to be locked down. The cost wasn't just financial. It was operational chaos. So the question shifted from how do we manage them to how do we neutralize them? The answer wasn't more guards or harsher punishments. It was removal from human systems altogether. This prison was designed around one core idea. If influence is a weapon, isolation is a countermeasure. Architects, psychologists, and security experts collaborated to create a facility where communication would be almost impossible. Every design choice, from the thickness of the walls to the angle of the corridors, served one purpose: total control. No shared spaces, no unsupervised movement, no chance encounters. Even sound was considered a risk. The prison eliminated traditional cell blocks in favor of individual containment units. Movement paths were calculated so inmates would never see each other. Guards were trained to interact briefly, mechanically, and without personal engagement. This wasn't about rehabilitation. It wasn't even about punishment. It was about containment of influence. Officials framed it as a necessary evolution, a last resort solution for the worst of the worst. A place reserved for inmates who had proven, again and again, that they could not exist safely within any other correctional environment. But from the beginning, critics raised a different concern. What happens when you remove not just freedom, but human contact itself? The prison solved one problem immediately. Violence dropped. Communication networks collapsed. External criminal operations went quiet. But a new, quieter issue began to surface. One that didn't show up in incident reports or statistics. Something was happening inside those cells. Something slower. Something harder to measure. And it raised a disturbing possibility. In trying to control the most dangerous minds, the system may have created an environment where the mind itself becomes a casualty. Life on the inside life inside this prison is built around one word: routine. Not comfort. Not progress. Routine. Every day looks the same, by design. Inmates wake up alone, in a concrete cell roughly the size of a parking space. The bed is bolted to the floor. The desk is concrete. The toilet and sink are steel, molded into the wall as a single unit. Nothing is loose. Nothing can be moved. Nothing can be altered. There are no bars. There doesn't need to be. The door is solid steel. controlled electronically from outside the cell. A narrow slot opens when food is delivered. No eye contact, no conversation. Just a tray slid through and a slot that closes again. Meals are eaten alone. Always. For 23 hours a day, inmates remain inside that cell. The remaining hour is not free time. It is controlled movement. When the door opens, the inmate steps out alone, escorted, often shackled. They do not pass other inmates. Corridors are timed so paths never cross. Even recreation is isolation. Instead of yard, there's a concrete enclosure, sometimes described as an outdoor cage. High walls, a slice of sky above, no equipment, no interaction, just walking in circles, alone, under surveillance. Communication is almost non-existent. There are no shared meals, no group programs, no casual conversations. Talking to other inmates is functionally impossible. Talking to staff is brief, procedural, and intentionally minimal. Guards are trained not to engage, not to react, not to personalize interactions. Everything is transactional. Step back. Hands visible. Door closing. Even education and reading materials are limited and monitored. Access depends on behavior, compliance, and security assessments. Any privilege can be removed instantly. Phones? Rare and heavily controlled. Visits? Behind glass, infrequent and often denied. Letters? Screened, delayed, and restricted. Time behaves differently in this environment. Without social interaction, days blur together. Weeks lose structure. Months pass without meaningful markers. There are no events to remember, no conversations to replay, no moments that break the cycle. For many inmates, the most difficult part isn't confinement, it's the silence. Humans are wired for interaction. Even negative contact reinforces a sense of reality. Here, that feedback loop disappears. Thoughts echo without interruption. Small worries grow larger. Memories replay endlessly. Some inmates begin talking to themselves, not loudly, not dramatically, but quietly, to fill the void. Others pace the cell for hours, counting steps, creating rituals to anchor time. Some stop speaking altogether. Sleep patterns deteriorate. Appetite changes. Concentration drops. Anxiety becomes constant. From the system's perspective, this is working. There are no fights, no riots, no coordinated plans. The environment is calm, predictable, controlled. On paper, it's a success, but control has a cost. Medical and mental health staff monitor inmates regularly, yet their role is limited. Treatment exists, but within strict boundaries. Therapy happens through doors. Evaluations are brief. Medications are used to manage symptoms, not to restore normalcy. This is not a place designed to heal. It's a place designed to hold. Over time, many inmates describe the same feeling, a gradual erosion of self. Not sudden breakdowns, but slow changes. Difficulty thinking clearly. Trouble forming sentences. Emotional numbness. They are alive. They are safe. But they are alone in a way few humans ever experience. And that leads to the question officials rarely address openly. If a system removes every form of human connection, what kind of person remains when, or if they are ever released? Who ends up here? The inmates sent to this prison are not chosen at random. They arrive here after the system reaches a conclusion that nothing else works. This facility isn't filled with impulsive offenders or short-term troublemakers. It houses individuals whose behavior showed a consistent pattern, control, coordination, and influence that extended far beyond their physical space. Many of them were already serving long sentences elsewhere. Some were lifers. Others were inmates who had turned ordinary prisons into operational hubs. From segregation units, they organized assaults. From lockdowns, they ran gangs. From solitary cells, they communicated orders that triggered violence across entire facilities. What made them dangerous wasn't constant aggression. It was precision. These inmates understood how prisons function. They studied routines, exploited staff shortages, manipulated weaker inmates, and leveraged fear as a resource. Some never touched anyone themselves. They didn't have to. Their reputation did the work for them. When prison officials describe these individuals, One word comes up repeatedly: disruptive. Not loud, not chaotic. Disruptive in a way that destabilizes entire systems. Transfers failed. Disciplinary sanctions failed. Standard isolation failed. Each time an inmate was moved, the same pattern emerged. Communication networks reformed, violence followed, and control slipped again. Eventually, the decision was made to remove these individuals from the normal prison ecosystem entirely. Placement here isn't automatic. It follows incident reports, behavioral assessments, intelligence reviews, and administrative hearings. The justification is always framed the same way. The inmate poses an ongoing threat to institutional security. Once transferred, reversal is rare. Inside this prison, inmates come from different backgrounds, different crimes, different ideologies, but they share one trait. The system decided their presence among others was too dangerous to allow. Some were leaders of organized groups. Some were repeat escape risks. Some were manipulators who turned staff against each other. Some were simply deemed uncontrollable. Over time, however, something interesting happens. Without followers, without communication, without reaction, influence loses value. Status fades. Reputation means nothing when no one can see you. Power dissolves when there's no one to exert it over. For inmates whose identity was built on control, the isolation cuts deeper than confinement. Some adapt. They comply. They become quiet, procedural, invisible. Others resist, not through violence, but through withdrawal. They stop engaging with staff. They refuse programs. They retreat inward. And a few unravel completely. Mental health records show patterns that repeat again and again: increased anxiety, depression, paranoia, and cognitive decline. Not overnight, gradually, subtly, almost quietly. What's striking is that many of these inmates were once highly functional inside the prison environment. Strategic thinkers, organized, focused. Here, that sharpness dulls. The system sees this as stabilization. Critics see it as deterioration. Officials argue that this environment prevents harm, and they're not wrong. But the question isn't whether it stops violence. It's what it replaces violence with. Because when a prison removes identity, influence, and interaction, it doesn't create neutrality. It creates absence. And that absence reshapes the people inside it in ways that are difficult and sometimes impossible to reverse. The system of total control, nothing inside this prison is accidental. Every movement, every pause, every rule exists to eliminate unpredictability. Control here is not enforced through force. It's enforced through design. The building itself is the first layer of the system. Corridors are narrow and angled. Doors are automated and centralized. Cells are arranged so inmates cannot see each other, even indirectly. Sound doesn't travel well. Sight lines are broken intentionally. In most prisons, staff respond to incidents. Here, incidents are prevented before they can exist. Surveillance is constant. Cameras monitor every corridor, every door, every movement. Cells are observed through reinforced glass panels or cameras. Depending on the unit, inmates know they are always visible, and that visibility becomes its own form of pressure. Guards don't patrol casually. They follow strict procedures. Movements are logged. Interactions are timed. Even the tone of voice used by staff is regulated. No personal conversation. No arguments. No emotional responses. The goal is neutrality, because emotion introduces variables. When an inmate is moved, the process is precise. Doors open and close in sequence. Inmates are restrained. Routes are cleared. Other inmates are locked down. No one sees anyone else. No one hears anything. Even medical visits follow this structure. Health professionals conduct assessments through doors or barriers when possible. Appointments are short, controlled, and documented. Mental health care exists, but within limits that prioritize security over depth. Privileges are used as levers. Access to books, phone calls, or limited recreation can be adjusted instantly. Compliance is rewarded. Resistance leads to further restriction. There is no negotiation, only compliance or consequence. From an operational standpoint, the system works. Violence is nearly non-existent. Escapes are unheard of. Communication networks collapse. This is control at its most efficient. But efficiency has side effects. When every aspect of life is managed externally, autonomy disappears. Decision-making muscles weaken. Initiative fades. Over time, inmates stop making choices, not because they can't, but because choices no longer matter. This creates a psychological shift. Instead of reacting to the world, inmates wait for it to act on them. Days are endured, not lived. Identity narrows to routine. Wake up, eat, wait, sleep. For staff, the system is safer, but also emotionally distant. Guards are trained to remain detached, yet prolonged exposure to this environment affects them too. Burnout is common. Turnover is high. The system protects bodies, but strains minds on both sides of the door. Officials point to the data. Fewer incidents, fewer injuries, lower operational chaos. By traditional metrics, it's a success. Critics point to what the data doesn't show. There are no metrics for emotional erosion, no charts for cognitive decline, no spreadsheets that capture what happens when humans exist without human contact. The system achieves total control, but in doing so, it removes unpredictability, spontaneity, and connection, the very traits that define human behavior, which leads to the uncomfortable reality at the center of this prison. Control has been perfected, but the cost of that perfection may be irreversible change. And that brings us to the final question, the one the system struggles to answer. The controversy from the outside. This prison looks like a solution. From the inside, it looks like an experiment with no clear endpoint. Supporters of the system point to results. Violence drops. Staff injuries decline. Gang coordination collapses. From a public safety standpoint, the prison does exactly what it was designed to do. It neutralizes threats the system could not otherwise manage. But critics argue the real impact isn't visible in statistics. It's visible over time. Mental health professionals have raised concerns about prolonged isolation, especially when it stretches into years or decades. They argue that the human brain is not designed for extreme sensory and social deprivation. Remove interaction long enough, and the mind doesn't simply pause. It changes. Former inmates describe similar experiences, even when their crimes were different. Disorientation, memory problems, emotional flattening, difficulty holding conversations after release, trouble interpreting social cues, a sense that the world feels too loud, too fast, too unpredictable. These effects don't always disappear when isolation ends. Legal challenges have questioned whether long-term solitary confinement crosses ethical or constitutional lines. Some lawsuits argue that the conditions amount to psychological harm rather than lawful incarceration. Others claim the system prioritizes control over any realistic path toward reintegration. The system's response is consistent. Officials argue that placement is rare, reviewed regularly, and reserved for inmates who pose extraordinary risks. They emphasize that the alternative, allowing these individuals to influence, organize, or endanger others, would result in more harm overall. And in many cases, they're right. This creates a moral standoff. On one side, safety, order, and containment. On the other, mental health, human dignity, and long-term consequences. There is no clean answer. Some inmates eventually earn transfers out through years of compliance. Others remain indefinitely, not because they commit new violations, but because the risk assessment never fully resets. Once labeled uncontrollable, it's difficult to reverse that judgment. The question becomes less about punishment and more about permanence. Is this a temporary measure or a place people slowly disappear into? International observers and human rights groups have criticized the model, warning that isolation on this scale may create individuals who are less stable, less adaptable, and more damaged than when they entered the system. Supporters counter that stability inside the prison system must come first, and that some individuals simply cannot coexist safely with others. Both sides agree on one thing: this prison changes people. The disagreement is whether that change is acceptable. In the end, this facility forces society to confront an uncomfortable truth. Some problems can be controlled. Some threats can be contained, but the methods used to achieve that control may leave scars that outlast the sentence itself. This prison doesn't just hold bodies. It reshapes minds. And whether that trade-off is justified remains one of the most controversial questions in modern corrections. The question that remains is prison was built to solve a problem no one wanted to admit existed. A place where control failed everywhere else. A place designed not for rehabilitation, but for containment. And by every measurable standard, it works. There are no riots here. No gangs running cell blocks. No messages moving through the walls. Just silence, order, and time. But control always comes with a cost. Because when you remove violence, influence, and chaos, you don't create peace. You create absence. An absence of interaction. An absence of identity. An absence of things that remind people they still exist within the world. This prison keeps society safe. That part is undeniable. The harder question is what it creates behind those doors. And what happens if the people inside are ever asked to return to a world they've been completely disconnected from? Is this the final evolution of incarceration? Or a line that, once crossed, can't be uncrossed? Because some prisons are designed to hold people, and others are designed to change them forever.